In 1985, a strange letter arrived at the editorial office of the Vitebsk worker newspaper in Belarus. The envelope was plain, but the message inside was explosive. The handwriting was jagged, almost dancing across the page, as if the writer was trying to disguise his style. The letter was signed by a group calling themselves the Patriots of Vitebsk. The text was a direct challenge to the Soviet authorities. It read, "Stop prosecuting innocent people. The killer is still out there. We are the ones punishing lewd women. We are the patriots." For the local police and the KGB, this letter was a nightmare, not because of the threats, but because of the reality it exposed. For 14 years, women had been disappearing in the Vitebsk region. Bodies were found in forests, near bus stops, and in ditches. And for 14 years, the police had been catching the culprits, or so they thought. By the time this letter arrived, 14 different men had already been convicted for these crimes. They were behind bars. One of them had already been executed by firing squad. The system had reported to Moscow that the region was safe, that the criminals had been caught, and that justice had been served. But the letter proved something terrifying. The killings hadn't stopped. The real monster was still free. And worst of all, the man hunting the women of Vitebsk was the same man helping the police search for the bodies. He was a model citizen, a member of the Communist Party, and a volunteer police officer. While the detectives were beating confessions out of innocent men, the real killer was standing right next to them, watching and laughing. This is the story of Gennady Mikhasevich, the Vitebsk Strangler. And it is the story of a justice system that was so desperate to look perfect. It became a serial killer's deadliest weapon. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s. Officially, serial killers did not exist in the USSR. The government propaganda claimed that serial murder was a capitalist disease, a symptom of Western decay. In a socialist paradise, people did not kill for pleasure. So when women started dying in the Vitebsk region in 1971, the police refused to see a pattern. They treated every murder as a separate, isolated domestic incident. They looked for jealous husbands, angry boyfriends, or local drunks. They were under immense pressure to keep their statistics clean. In the Soviet police system, an unsolved crime was a stain on your record. It could cost you a promotion or even your job. This pressure created a conveyor belt of injustice. When a woman was found dead, the police would grab the first convenient suspect. They didn't need hard evidence. They just needed a confession, and they knew how to get one. Suspects were interrogated for days without sleep. They were threatened. They were told that if they didn't confess, their families would suffer. Broken and terrified, these men signed whatever papers were put in front of them. One of these men was Nikolai Terenya. He was innocent, but under the weight of the system, he confessed to a murder he didn't commit. He was sentenced to death and executed. Another man named Glushakov was sentenced to prison, where he went blind from stress and abuse. In total, 14 innocent men were convicted for crimes committed by one single phantom. While these innocent men were being destroyed, Gennady Mikhasevich was living the perfect Soviet life. He was charming, polite, and hardworking. He had a good job at a repair farm. He was a loving father of 2 children. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, and he was an active member of the Communist Party. In the eyes of his neighbors, he was the ideal man. He even had a status symbol that few Soviet citizens could dream of, a personal car. It was a red Zaz 968 known as a Zaporozhets. It wasn't a luxury car by Western standards. It was small, loud, and cramped. But in the 1980s, owning any car made you elite. It gave him freedom, it gave him mobility, and it gave him a way to lure his victims. Mikhasevich used his car to pick up women who were hitchhiking or waiting for buses on lonely rural roads. He seemed safe. He looked like a respectable family man. Who would be afraid of a clean-cut party member in a red car? But once they were inside, the trap snapped shut. But Mikhasevich's perfect disguise went even deeper. He was a druzhinik, a member of the Voluntary People's Patrol. These were citizens who wore red armbands and helped the regular police patrol the streets and keep order. This role gave him incredible power. He knew where the police patrols were. He knew the investigation plans. Sometimes he even participated in the searches for his own victims. Imagine the horror of the situation. The police are combing the forest for a missing girl, and the man walking next to them, poking the ground with a stick, is the very man who buried her there. He was hunting with the hounds and running with the hare. For years, Mikhasevich felt invincible. He watched the innocent men go to prison for his crimes and felt a sense of superiority. He believed he was smarter than the entire Soviet legal system, and for a long time he was right. But arrogance is a killer's greatest weakness. By 1985, the body count was rising, and even the stubborn local authorities couldn't hide the panic anymore. Rumors were spreading through the population. People were afraid to leave their homes at night. Mikhasevich decided to play a game. He wanted to confuse the investigation further. He wanted to derail the police, who were starting to suspect that a serial killer might be real. So he wrote the letter to the newspaper. He invented an imaginary anti-Soviet organization called the Patriots of Vitebsk. He wrote letters threatening the government and claiming responsibility for the murders as political acts. He thought this was a brilliant move. He thought the KGB would waste their time chasing political dissidents instead of a murderer. But he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated a new investigator who had just been assigned to the case. His name was Nikolai Ignatovich. Unlike the local detectives who just wanted to close cases quickly, Ignatovich was a varyag, an outsider sent from Minsk with a mandate to find the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Ignatovich did something revolutionary. He looked at all the files, the unsolved cases and the solved ones. He saw the similarities, the locations, the method of killing, the red car seen by witnesses. He realized that the 14 men in prison were innocent. He realized there was only one killer. When the Patriots of Vitebsk letter arrived, Ignatovich didn't see a political threat. He saw a clue. He consulted with graphologists, handwriting experts. They told him that the person who wrote the letter was likely the killer, trying to throw them off the scent. The investigation launched one of the most massive operations in criminal history. They decided to check the handwriting of the entire male population of the Vitebsk region. It sounds impossible, but in the Soviet Union, the state had records on everyone. Detectives collected handwriting samples from factories, offices, and military bases. They analyzed over 556,000 samples. It was searching for a needle in a haystack, but Ignatovich was relentless. At the same time, the police set up checkpoints on the roads. They were stopping every red Zaporozhets car. They checked thousands of drivers. Mikhasevich was stopped multiple times, but every time he showed his party card and his volunteer police ID. The officers would salute him and wave him through. "Pass, comrade. Good luck with your service." They never suspected one of their own. But the net was tightening. The handwriting experts finally found a match. The jagged, dancing letters from the Patriot's note matched a sample from a routine form filled out by a worker at a repair farm. The name on the form was Gennady Mikhasevich. Ignatovich couldn't believe it at first. A party member? A volunteer policeman? It seemed impossible, but the evidence was there. They put Mikhasevich under surveillance. They watched him live his normal, boring life. Then they decided to bring him in. They didn't arrest him violently. They simply asked him to come to the station for a routine clarification. Mikhasevich was calm. He was used to being at the police station. He thought he could talk his way out of it. But when Ignatovich placed the Patriot's letter on the table in front of him, Mikhasevich's face changed. He realized the game was over. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He simply asked, "Can I say goodbye to my wife?" During the interrogation, Mikhasevich confessed to 36 murders. Later, he claimed the number was 43. He spoke about the killings casually, as if he were discussing the weather or a car repair. He took the investigators to the crime scenes. He showed them where the bodies were hidden. He showed them where he had hidden the victims' belongings: jewelry, lipstick, purses, in his garage, and even in his family home. His wife and children had been living surrounded by trophies of death without ever knowing. The trial of Gennady Mikhasevich in 1987 was a sensation, but it was a quiet sensation. The Soviet government didn't want to publicize the scale of the disaster. Mikhasevich was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad. But the story didn't end with his death. The aftermath of the Mikhasevich case shook the Soviet justice system to its core. It wasn't just about one killer. It was about the system that allowed him to operate for 14 years. Investigator Ignatovich didn't stop with the killer. He went after the people who had convicted the innocent. Because of his work, one of the biggest purges in Soviet legal history took place. Nearly 200 officials, investigators, prosecutors, judges, and police officers were fired, demoted, or punished. Some were even prosecuted criminally for forcing confessions. The 14 innocent men were exonerated. For Nikolai Terenya, it was too late. He had already been executed, a victim of a system that cared more about reports than human life. The others were released, but their lives were shattered. They were broken men, returning to a world that had branded them as monsters. The case of the Vitebsk Strangler remains a dark warning. It is a story about the banality of evil, how a monster can hide behind a smile and a party badge. But more importantly, it is a story about the danger of a justice system that refuses to admit its mistakes. Gennady Mikhasevich killed dozens of women with his own hands, but the Soviet system, with its quotas and its pride, handed him the weapon. In the end, the red car and the red armband were just camouflage. The real darkness was not in the forest, but in the offices where innocent men were signed away into oblivion, all for the sake of a perfect statistic.